Welcome, engineers. I'm Travis IQ, and today we're going to talk about Twitter. Well, not exactly Twitter. We're going to talk about security in the context of the Twitter hack, which happened just recently, yesterday as of the recording of this video. And so what we need to know first is what happened, right? And so what I have behind me over my right shoulder is a post made by the hackers on a high-profile Twitter account, former President Barack Obama. There were a number of other high-profile users who were compromised in this attack, and they weren't the users compromised. I should talk about this too, right? It was actually Twitter's primary dashboard functionality that allowed them to do this. So it wasn't the users, because the users had secure multi-factor, not just SMS, not just secure password, two-factor, not SMS, good multi-factor auth, right? And so users included Elon Musk, Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, Kanye West, Floyd Mayweather, among others. Businesses as well, Apple, Uber, Cash App, right? And so there was a lot of stuff going on Twitter yesterday. And if you notice in the post behind me, the hackers were posting a Twitter, a Bitcoin scam, really. And so now that we know what happened to some extent, right, then the question is, what happened from a security standpoint? And so the initial reports were that it was a social engineering attack, that some accounts, some internal accounts were compromised at Twitter, and then those internal accounts were used to gain access to Twitter's internal dashboard, a dashboard that could be utilized to manage accounts remotely, post on behalf of accounts, things like this. Nobody really knows exactly to what extent the dashboard had control over these accounts, or what the dashboard had access to in terms of, let's say, DMs or deleted posts or things like this. So I think that there's still a little bit of the jury out on what exactly the hackers had access to. But the initial reports were that it was, a social engineering attack and that something was compromised. Vice reported just recently, so that would be today, that it may not have just been a social engineering attack, but it may have been a malicious insider who was actually paid, a Twitter employee paid to do something. This is not the first time that Twitter has had an issue with a malicious insider. If anybody remembers the compromise of Donald Trump's account, where the current president had his account deleted, that was actually also a malicious Twitter insider. That was a Twitter employee who was on his final day. This has been well vetted, but on his final day of work at Twitter, deleted Donald Trump's Twitter account and then left. And so I point this out because it's interesting that Donald Trump's Twitter account was not compromised in this attack. And the reports are also that perhaps there was stricter guidelines put on the president's account as a result of the previous malicious insider. And so you would think, I would suspect, right, that Twitter is going to put in more safeguards against these malicious insider incidents as a result of both that, the result of that previous malicious insider, and this, which is very, very interesting. So how does this fit in the context of our social engineering framework, right? And so what I did want to talk about quickly was social engineering and the components of social engineering. And so I'll use this as a teaching tool as well, but what we can do as well is talk about the mechanisms of social engineering. And again, there isn't enough reporting out there about what occurred to really understand how these single or multiple Twitter employees were convinced or engineered to give access to, right, these types of things to the internal dashboard. But we do need to be cognizant of how this aspect of security works, right? And so there are some primary components of social engineering, right? One being trust is a potential way that you can exploit another human being, right? Given some level of trust, you can get them to do things as they believe you, right? You could use urgency or scarcity, right? A lot of these are some of those monetary phishing attacks and email phishing attacks. If you send me X amount of dollars, then I can send you this amount back, but you have to do it in this amount of time because I don't have much time to do it for you, right? Authority. again, any number of authority-based social engineering attacks. A lot have to do with taxes or police or you're in trouble, or sometimes these phished email attacks come from CEO email accounts of the company you're an employee of, and now you take them very seriously because they're an authority figure in your organization. But the email source address was spoofed. And then finally, familiarity or liking. These are some of the primary components of social engineering. So while we're talking about the Twitter hack, right, what I would also like to do is give some context about social engineering as a topic, as well as a security topic. Okay, so the question is, where do we go from here? Well, I think that there's going to be a significant internal investigation by Twitter, maybe some call for like an external investigation of what happened because it was so egregious, right? They also posted links to, a Bitcoin address, so financial gain may have been a primary motivator here, or maybe it isn't. There were some interesting secondary articles on Business Insider, and I think Vice alluded to this as well, that maybe it's part of a more elaborate scheme to do other things and maybe kick this off with a high-profile Twitter hack, which is really interesting, right? Brian Krebs talked about a few other things as well. Let's see if we can't bring this up on the big screen here. Related to what happens, right? Or what had happened and what happens from here, right? So one of the first questions is, what did they have access to? Could they have also viewed targets' direct messages, deleted accounts? This was Twitter's initial report. We detected what we believe to be a coordinated social engineering attack. Again, Vice has discounted this to some extent, or at least reframed it. And then finally, right, Twitter's initial response was to suspend the ability of verified accounts to tweet for several hours on the day of the occurrence. Brian Krebs was affected by this. A number of other verified Twitter accounts were affected by this. I was not, because I do not have a verified Twitter account. However, I was watching it unfold on Twitter, and it was very interesting. I would encourage you to investigate a little bit further on your own as well. I know that we presented a lot of the scenario to this point, but I think that there's going to be a lot of additional information coming out over the coming weeks and months, I would bet, as a result of this being such a wide-ranging attack and hitting so many high-profile targets, right? So keep an eye out, and I will probably give an update video at some point regarding what transpired as a result of this high-profile hack. That being said, as always, engineer, break stuff, and have fun.